New University of Otago research on keas was released last week and should make an important contribution to the New Zealand alpine parrot's conservation. Researchers looked at genetic variation in kea populations. It found because of kea's genetic structure, it's possible to move birds between populations to reverse their ongoing decline. Dr. Nicolas Dussex undertook the research for his PhD at the Department of Zoology. He joins me now. Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Tell us, why did you undertake this particular research?
So the idea was to try and study the genetics of the species, to look at genetic diversity, what was left, because the kea has been heavily persecuted, and to try and see if there were genetically distinct populations. And the idea was to use this information to guide the conservation of the species.
What did your research involve?
So the first bit was the fun bit, being in the field, catching kea, which was sometimes difficult, but extremely enjoyable. And the next bit was to take the blood collected in the field in the lab, extract the DNA, and from this DNA you want to sequence genes of interest that will give you information about kea demography, all that sort of things. And the final bit involves result analysis and writing up those results.
And what were the results?
Well, in this particular study we were interested in the population structure, and to our surprise we found that kea was not homogeneous, a large homogeneous population, but that there were 3 subunits, or subpopulations as we call them. And this was surprising because kea are strong flyers, so you would expect lots of gene flow all over the South Island because it's a relatively small island. But we found 3 distinct units, and the next bit was to try and understand what was the origin of this pattern. And we found that it was not the result of human persecution following a drastic population decline, but it was more the result of post-glacial recolonization, so at the end of the last glaciation.
Now, we've heard that the findings will make an important contribution to kea conservation, but what needs to happen now?
Well, at this stage, DOC is not managing kea populations, but if the species continue to decline, there would be a need, possibly, of translocation. And what we advise in our paper is if translocation should occur, you wouldn't have to restrict those movements of birds within those subpopulations, but you could translocate them over larger distances, which would make the process less expensive and much easier. So, for instance, you could take birds from the Mount Cook population and supplement a Fiordland population.
Now, the species is now protected. What is the status of its population at this point?
So it's quite hard to have accurate estimates because it's a large area, it's quite remote, difficult to access. But we estimate that there are between 1,000 to 5,000 birds, which is not much, especially if you take into consideration that between the late 1800s and 1900s, 1970s, there were 150,000 birds killed. So we think with those numbers that the historical population was much larger than this. And the problem is that this population is still declining, mainly because of introduced predators, stoats and possum, but also because of interaction with humans, and also kea are quite inquisitive and they have the tendency of chewing on things and often lead things, lead nails, and that could kill them. So these are the threats.
Now, there was also a Swiss university involved in the research. What was its role?
So I collaborated with Dr. Daniel Wegman, who's a population geneticist, and I asked him for his help because he developed the methods I used. So there were lots of modeling approaches to try and understand the population history of kea. And those methods are quite complicated sometimes. So it's not a simple program that you press start and wait patiently for the results. It's a bit more complicated. So he had the expertise and all the theory behind it. So it was of great help.
What's your sense for the growth of the population and its survival?
Well, as I said, 1,000 to 5,000 birds is not much. You have to bear in mind that there are much more kiwis than that, kiwi birds. So it's a really small population. So it seems, the prospects seem quite grim. But on the other hand, I'm quite optimistic because people recognize that kea are actually declining, which is something that lots of people ignore, but this is changing quite a bit. People are aware of it, people like kea, and also people seems to me that people are more trust science a bit more, and what science tells us is that if you have an intensive predator control scheme those tendencies could be reversed. So we're quite optimistic.
Dr. Nicolas Dussex, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks.